On this podcast, you'll find interviews with high-performing, successful individuals in life sciences. On a weekly basis, we cover their proven methods, principles, strategies, and mindsets to implement new technologies that scale to meet the needs of people in our world.
Welcome to the Life Science Success Podcast. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Don, and I'm a consultant in life sciences. I help companies overall focus in on operational excellence. And one of the biggest things that I've been working on lately is with a lot of different organizations, they're looking for bigger transformation inside the organization, value stream mapping, implementing lean, and also implementing Six Sigma. I've been doing an awful lot of that lately with different organizations. And so if you are an organization that currently is struggling with people, process, or technology, please reach out. I'd be happy to have a quick conversation with you about whether or not if I can help. So with that, let me bring in our guest for today. In this episode of Life Science Success, my guest is Dr. Paul Song. Dr. Song has served as Chief Executive Officer and Vice Chairman of NKGen since December of 2022. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. And would you mind just taking a moment and telling the listeners just a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So I am actually a board-certified radiation oncologist by training. Worked for over 20 years, actually taking care of patients on a day-to-day basis, primarily with tumors that were human papilloma derived. So head and neck cancers, cervical cancers, really any of the solid tumors that have origins based on the viral etiology. I did also treat a fair number of prostate cancer patients throughout my career, but it was during my dad's own battle with cancer where nothing seemed to work and the conventional treatments really didn't show any hope that I started to look at what other companies and innovative solutions were doing. It really led me to really ascertain that basically all of the tools that we had in the cancer toolkit were inadequate, and that we needed to really look at other approaches towards disease. And I came across some people that were doing work with natural killer cells, and that sort of led me to the path that I'm in right now.
Yeah, so I mean, it is so interesting to me to watch kind of this evolution that's going on, right? I mean, there are all of these companies that are out there between T cells and natural killer cells. I feel like there's great advancements kind of, in both fronts. I also kind of look at, maybe further out, a lot longer range. My sort of history with life sciences starts all the way back whenever we were talking about the impact that monoclonal antibodies were going to have on everything. And so, and it took kind of this long evolution, right? There's not a quick pathway for a lot of different things. And so companies like, NKGen, I believe are, extremely important from that standpoint.
Absolutely. So when I was in college and then even in medical school, the advances that we had made as a society pale in comparison to the advances that we have made in the last 10 years alone. Part of that is through the speed of high-speed computers, being able to visualize, image things down to the basic cell, down to nanoparticles that we could not do when I was in medical school. And that's really accelerated discovery, as well as really taking a step back from the way we were treating cancer per se. Really, the primary ways are you either cut it out, you gave chemotherapy, or you tried to radiate it. But in between, we've now learned that the immune system plays a huge role in preventing cancer as well as in the treatment of cancer. Things such as the microbiome in terms of the flora of one's gut and how that affects how you process everything from nutrients to, again, how that impacts the immune system comes into play. And then just in terms of a more holistic approach, really mind-body, looking at the role of stress and environmental factors. So you're starting to see all of these areas that never worked together now really start to work together. So it's an exciting time, but I do think that the advancement of high-speed computers and technology has really accelerated our ability to look at ways to treat disease that we never would have imagined.
Yeah, I also concur with a lot of what you covered there in terms of just the impact of the microbiome, the impact of just our natural environment, and our relationship, especially to things that take away from our immune system. So absolutely. In terms of your sort of overall progression, what are some of those pivotal moments or decisions that have shaped your career and brought you to where you are?
Oh, there have been numerous, I think, milestones or obstacles that have occurred throughout my career. I would say in the practice of medicine, early on, I started to see how many patients who had worked hard their whole lives, done all the right things, be harmed by just coming down with cancer. They had exercised vigorously, eaten healthy, and yet they still had tumors. And then once they got cancer, despite the fact that they had worked hard, were insured, quite a few of them were facing financial ruin because of the way our healthcare system has been structured. That made me really take a look at overall just what was broken about our healthcare system. And then my own dad's journey with cancer, ultimately, he died within 9 months of being diagnosed. It was a very rapid decline. And as an oncologist, feeling powerless and watching that happen, again, made me realize that maybe there was a better way that we could approach the treatment of diseases, either on the preventative side or perhaps looking at treatments where the treatment was not worse than the disease itself. I saw my dad suffer tremendously from the chemotherapy that he received, and even some of the surgical interventions. And his quality of life was really awful the last several months of his battle. And it made me realize that before I put my own patients through that, could there be other ways to approach disease? So I think that really caused a huge shift in terms of how comfortable I felt with just continuing the status quo, and really led me to look at other options and then ultimately pivot into biotech.
It's really unfortunate to have a loved one go through what you described with your father, and just watching not only like the decline of the person, but also sort of what you have to do to try and hold the status quo. Really the conventional medicine methods for handling that, oftentimes are very daunting for just anyone. And then you take somebody that is so sick, and then it's just not a good journey for the patient at all.
So true. And I think it was my own father who basically told me, look, I am at peace. I've had a beautiful life. Please don't make me do any more of these therapies, because it's really, he just wanted to enjoy the time he had left with us. And I think that he wanted to be present and really value that. And that taught me a lot about what the difference was between just trying to treat to extend a day or two, or actually not treat to improve quality of life over a period of time. So I really started to look for treatments that perhaps really treated more of a holistic approach versus just the short-term gain. And that's really how I came across immunotherapy. And with natural killer cells, the most I ever learned about natural killer cells was maybe a 10-minute lecture during my second year of medical school during pathology, but really didn't know much about natural killer cells for a long time. So spent the last, I would say, 6 or 7 years really devouring the literature, learning as much as I can, and then also being able to look at other ways that natural killer cells could be applied, not just in cancer. And that's what we're really excited to be working on.
So maybe it makes sense first just to talk about NKGen, and a little bit more about what it is that you're working on, and what sort of pathway are you seeing for the company?
Well, really, the first thing I just want to mention is people ask what a natural killer cell is, because again, it's not something that's even talked about much. You have basically in your body three different types of cells in your blood, right? You have red blood cells that transport oxygen. You have white blood cells that traditionally fight infections, and they are the basis of your immune system. And then you have platelets that help clotting after you've been cut or with wound healing. Within the white blood cells, though, there are several cells. The most notable one is T cells, which is what some of you viewers may have heard of, the CAR T treatments that have been established using one's own T cells. But then there's a second immune cell that's equally prominent called natural killer cells. Now, natural killer cells really are the first line in our body's defense against numerous events. When our bodies occasionally do produce a renegade cancer cell, it's natural killer cells that have the ability to police your body and identify those things that are normal and should be left alone, or those things that are diseased, such as a cancer cell, such as a virally infected cell, maybe a protein, maybe an immune cell that is attacking one's own body. Natural killer cells have 40 plus receptors that they use sort of like a blind person using their fingers to read Braille. They can use these receptors as they come across parts of your body to say, this is normal, leave it alone, or this shouldn't be here, and let's get rid of it. So the natural killer cells are just an essential part in human health. Now, depending on how stressed our bodies are, how our lifestyle changes can be disrupted from a lack of sleep or poor diet, our immune systems can wax and wane in terms of their strength and overall ability from day to day. If you recall, maybe during your time in college, or even now when you see somebody who is undergoing a stressful period, whether they're studying for finals or have some stress, sometimes you'll see them develop a cold sore, or with seniors, they can develop shingles. What that represents is some sort of stressful event that can weaken the immune system and allow latent viruses to reactivate to cause those lesions. Natural killer cells are one of those cells that can be suppressed from time to time. And in fact, if your viewers were to Google natural killer cell dysfunction or weak natural killer cells with numerous diseases, they will find thousands of publications that correlate weak or deficient natural killer cells with everything from autoimmune diseases to autism to cancer. And so what we wanted to do was to try to set up a way to take patients' own natural killer cells, make them more powerful, and give them back to patients to really tackle numerous diseases, not just cancer. Now, the overall challenge of natural killer cells are they're extremely difficult to get to grow. And that's why you don't really see many companies that are using what we call an autologous method, meaning when I take your cells and give you back your own cells, that's called autologous. Most natural killer cells are using something called allogenic, where they have screened numerous donors and they find that one donor whose cells they can reliably grow, and they try to use those cells for other diseases. The problem is when I use someone else's cells in your body, there's a chance that it can elicit an allergic reaction or some sort of hypersensitivity immune reaction. So the fact that we can get patients' own cells to grow, we can grow them into massive quantities, but generally make them about 400 times more powerful and bring out the receptors so they're really heightened in terms of their ability to recognize self that should be left alone and things that are not of self that should be destroyed. That's really at our core what our technology is. And we've been now able to demonstrate that these cells can play a role across numerous diseases. And that's what we're really excited about. It's a non-toxic, because they are your own cells, they're not genetically modified. And by nature, natural killer cells can discern normal tissue from disease. They don't cause any damage to your healthy cells, and they don't cause any side effects.
Yeah, I mean, I'm given again, the sensitivity of a lot of these patients, I can understand the importance of being able to appropriately target the cancer versus versus anything else, and the way that natural killer cells, work, obviously, is something that that I think is is exciting in terms of cancer research and the direction that everybody's going. In terms of the vision that you have for NKGen, can you talk a little bit about sort of the future that you see for the company?
It's a great question. So, first and foremost, the founder and myself really wanted to do something that was going to have a profound impact in patients' lives. It was never something where let's just create something to maximize profit or to gouge society. We also were driven by science. So even though I'm an oncologist by training, and we started our initial work in cancer and started to see some positive signal, where we have seen the greatest benefit is in the treatment of Alzheimer's disease, which up to this point, no one would have ever considered using natural killer cells. And we sort of stumbled upon this. I wish I could say we were so brilliant that we knew natural killer cells could be used for Alzheimer's disease. But it was something that we did by chance. And what happened was our founder's father had advanced Alzheimer's disease. He was sitting in an assisted living facility, unable to talk, had not been able to get out of bed without help for years. And this was pre-COVID. But my his father, he was worried that he was going to get an infection because in a nursing facility where you're living in tight quarters, if one person comes down with a cold, everyone does. It's kind of like when my kids were in preschool. So we had just completed our phase 1 trial in cancer and showed that our cells had no side effects. And he asked me, he said, do you think it would be okay if I gave my father his own enhanced NK cells to boost his immune system so he wouldn't have an infection? Because we knew it was safe, we said sure. So he found a way to provide some treatment for his father. And after about 3 or 4 doses, given roughly once a month, he said, you're not going to believe this, but my father is now talking to me. He hasn't said a word to me in years, but he's now speaking with me. And more importantly, when we're in his room and he's watching TV and we're watching the news and the newscaster says something about the economy or something, he understands it and he actually starts to converse to me about it. Can you see if there's any precedent that natural killer cells might work in Alzheimer's? So immediately I scoured the literature and could not find one publication, could not find one academic center of excellence that had ever done any work. And I relayed that. And I said, no, I don't think so. Maybe this is a coincidence. But shortly thereafter, one of our employees' wives had come across a GoFundMe page for one of their friends who had a brother who was in his late 30s and in hospice. He was working as a management consultant up in the Bay Area, was getting lost on his way to work, started to act erratically. And initially they thought he might have some sort of bipolar disorder or some substance abuse issue, but he was found to have a rare genetic mutation called PSEN1, which guaranteed before the age of 50, he would either have full-blown Alzheimer's or frontotemporal dementia. Unfortunately, 4 years later, when we met him, he had developed full advanced Alzheimer's disease and was requiring 24-hour care, and it was very expensive. And at the time when we met him, he couldn't talk, walk, or get out of a wheelchair. He couldn't feed himself. He didn't know when he needed to go to the bathroom. And it was such a difficult situation for both the family and he to endure. So we reached out to the family and we let him know that we were not sure whether or not this would work, but we knew it was safe. And if they were willing to try, we would be willing to try this on him. And the family immediately jumped at the opportunity. They said, we know you can't promise this, but there's nobody willing to try anything for him. And but we wanted to independently validate everything. So we had Dr. Ming Guo, who's the head of Alzheimer's at UCLA, independently see this patient. And before we started, this patient was, again, unable to speak or even hold a pen, so she couldn't even do a mini mental status exam. After the exam, Dr. Guo called me and said that she had never seen anyone so bad because he was so young. But then we proceeded to treat him. And after about 3 treatments, he was soon able to hold not only a pen, he was able to hold chopsticks. And whereas he had not been able to feed himself, he was now able to feed himself and even speak. We continued to treat him, and shortly thereafter, he was able to even get out of a wheelchair and walk. And towards the end, he was able to run somewhat clumsily, but he was able to do that. So that was the second experience where we saw some really unprecedented response. But again, because of his genetic mutation, we weren't sure if this was a one-off or some sort of unusual case. So we did try this on one more traditional Alzheimer's patient. One of the investment bankers in New York, I had met him at a healthcare conference in New York, and he had lamented that his mom had advanced Alzheimer's disease and how she was no longer able to recognize who he was and required a lot of care. And unfortunately, how the pharmaceutical industry was really focused on earlier stage disease. So after the meeting, I had called him and I said, again, we don't know if this is going to work, but if you would be willing, here's what we've seen so far, and we'd like to make this available. And they absolutely said yes. So we started to treat her, and after about 5 or 6 treatments, she was able to remember her kid's name. She was able to remember she lived in New York. She was now able to walk and really had dramatic improvement. And so based on those cases, we felt like there was a there. But when I would speak to leading Alzheimer's experts or venture capitalists, they all thought we were crazy. They said this doesn't make sense. You should stay in your lane. But because what we had seen, we just couldn't ignore it. And to our credit, our founder said to me, "Look, just keep trying to figure out the mechanism of action. We'll find a way to fund it." And so we moved forward with an official phase 1 trial. I continued to try to figure out the mechanism of action, kind of like how, I felt like I was studying for a PhD. And the best part about this is over the last 4 years, we did finally figure out the mechanism of action. Our phase 1 trial continued to show that we were taking patients that had never shown improvement and showed quite a bit of improvement, or at least stopped them from getting worse. And we collected biomarker data in our trial, meaning we did lumbar punctures where we measured changes in protein in the cerebral spinal fluid, changes in inflammation, and all of those things. And finally, after maybe 4 to 5 years of people not believing what we were doing, we not only presented our data at the biggest Alzheimer's conference in October, but we also just got FDA approval from the United States FDA to move forward with a phase 2 trial. So it's one of those areas where we never thought this would be the area to go. But we just followed what we were actually seeing. It's different to try to cure something in a mouse and then it doesn't work in a human. We actually saw that it was actually working in advanced patients with Alzheimer's disease, and then tried to have to figure out why we were seeing what we were seeing. And now we feel like we've been able to bring that together. So as far as direction, we believe that this is something that we want to bring to the clinic as soon as possible to help as many people as possible. We're really cognizant of trying to build a processing, a manufacturing route that can reduce costs as much as possible, because look, there are over 55 million people in the world that have some form of dementia, of which 46 million have either Alzheimer's or Parkinson's. And we'd like to do something that doesn't bankrupt society and that can be a real value add to society. My best man in my weddings, mom has advanced Alzheimer's, and I think about How can I get her on this trial as soon as possible? At the same time, I want to do something that she or anyone, regardless of their ability to pay, will have access to. And so that's what drives us. It drives our company. It drives me personally. And that's what we've really focused on as our immediate goal. We're still doing work in cancer and other things, but that's our immediate goal.
Yeah, it's amazing to hear. One, that just the overall results. So, my mom, who's 92, just recently passed away, had dementia in the end, and so I certainly can understand and sympathize with that. Even though she could do most things, she would have her moments of confusion and just very just a very upsetting time, overall, to not know or understand kind of what your surroundings were and things like that. It was an interesting time, and to know that there could be a way to actually either stop or make things better for patients like that. Because, like you said, I mean, as of today, it's a very sort of limited path that that you go through, with the caregivers. Essentially, it's there's not a lot that they can do, for it. It seems, as of today.
You're so right. And one, I'm so sorry to hear about your mom's passing, and also how the last years of her life were less than ideal. I think that that's what, unfortunately, all too many are going through, both on the patient
Mm.
side as well as the family. And I think that if we can help with that, to prime example, the patient that we're treating in New York, before we started, she couldn't walk by herself. She couldn't get out of a chair by herself. She couldn't go up a flight of stairs. So that was a very massive burden on her caregiver, on her caregiver's back, trying to lift her up. And now, after several treatments, she's able to get out of a chair and walk by herself. Um, are we able to restore the full, you know, mental cognition? Probably not. I mean, the patients that we've focused on really have lost a lot. They were no longer able to speak, but if now they're able to say a few words and even understand what you're saying, that can really have a profound impact. And it should be noted, as you pointed out, that right now the best treatments for Alzheimer's disease really have focused on the early stage mild cognitive impairment. And what they've been able to do is just slow the decline. But the
Mhm.
fact is, even with their treatment, nobody's getting better and nobody's stabilizing. They continue to get worse. What we've at least seen so far in our phase 1 trial is that 90% of our patients either remain stable or got better, which again is not seen before. So as we start our phase 2 trial, we're very optimistic that we can even show even better results because we're going to be using a higher dosing of our cells and a prolonged dosing. And we're going after the population that, again, generally most of big pharma and the medical community have given up on. The more moderate advanced patients are who we're really focused on, because we believe if we can stop their progression or even show some improvement in that population, then we can move it upstream for earlier stage disease and maybe even prevention. But to show in a more advanced population for whom no treatment to date has ever shown any efficacy is quite a challenge, but we believe it's worth taking.
So, just to kind of clarify, one last time for anybody that's listening that wants to know more about this treatment, you are, at what phase of clinical trial, and I guess how could people learn more?
Well, we just completed our phase 1 trial. And for your viewers, a phase 1 trial is where you really look at safety. It's less about efficacy. It's really to make sure that your treatment doesn't cause untoward side effects. And if it does, what is the highest dose where you can sort of reach without causing too severe side effects? So we finished our phase 1 and we showed that we didn't have any side effects that were related to our therapy at all. Our phase 2 trial was just green lighted by the FDA. In our phase 1 trial, we only gave 4 doses, and we gave, it was a dose escalation study. So we gave 1 billion cells, 2 billion cells, and 4 billion cells for 4 doses. For the phase 2 trial, the US FDA has given us permission to go up to 6 billion cells and to treat for a full year. Now, the first 3 patients are technically considered a phase 1 because you want to show that at the 6 billion dose it's safe. But we have treated cancer patients at that dose and known that it's safe. So we really do expect the same. And after we enroll the first 3 patients, then the remaining patients will all be enrolled in a phase 2 trial, which is really looking mostly at efficacy. And that's where we started enrolling patients last week in the United States. We will bring other sites up in the next several months, some sites in Florida, some sites in California. And we hope to add some sites in New York and elsewhere, but they can go to our website, www.nkgenbiotech.com. It will probably have a link to, where the clinical trials are being held. And then people would need to contact those sites. We do not have any influence on who can enroll or not. We have independent principal investigators that will make that decision. They'll monitor the patients and they'll see what happens.
Great. Okay. And why don't we talk just a little bit about your cancer therapy in terms of on the oncology side, where are things with that, and what are you sort of seeing as the future on the oncology side?
Absolutely. Before I do, I just want to say one last thing on the Alzheimer's, if I can,
Sure.
is that what our phase 1 trial showed was that when we took patients' own NK cells, grew them and made them more powerful without any genetic modification, and then we gave them back to patients via an IV, that they were able to get up into the brain to reduce the proteins that accumulate in the brain, as well as the inflammation that accumulates in the brain. And there were no side effects with that whatsoever. With regard to cancer, how sort of the role of natural killer cells have been approached by a lot of companies is different than the way we approach things. So as I mentioned, there's another cell in your body called T cells. And there's been a lot of success, particularly in leukemia and lymphomas, with something called CAR T, which is a chimeric antigen receptor engineered T cell therapy. What they do is they genetically engineer, they say that a tumor has a specific mutation on it. They engineer a targeted antigen that they attach to a T cell. They allow the T cells to grow, and then they give these back to patients. Unlike NK cells, T cells only have one receptor, and they can cause a lot of collateral damage. And they can cause something called cytokine release syndrome. So there's a lot of side effects potentially with CAR T, and they're including some people have even died from the side effects. Now they are getting much better at controlling those side effects. But a lot of companies felt, okay, well, if CAR T is very toxic, let's see if we can take natural killer cells, engineer them in a similar way, and have a safer treatment for cancer. The problem has been with natural killer cells, though, when you genetically modify a natural killer cell, and if I take your natural killer cell and put it in another patient, meaning that allogenic treatment, chances are that patient's immune system destroys and chews them up before they ever get to the target, because they have the ability to recognize that. So one of the ways that people have tried to combat that is to give low-dose chemotherapy to weaken one's immune system so that the engineered natural killer cells can escape detection, get to the target tumor, and destroy it. Unfortunately, most of the treatments thus far have not really been as effective as the CAR T treatments. We didn't adopt that approach. We were not trying to hit a home run. So they engineer it, and then they're hoping that their engineered cell by itself will eradicate the tumor. What we thought was that taking non-engineered but highly enhanced natural killer cells, that they could make other existing cancer therapies work better. So rather than hit a home run by itself, we were trying to hit singles by combination approaches, whether they be monoclonal antibodies that you mentioned earlier. Monoclonal antibodies bind to a specific cancer target, and then you have natural killer cells that come in and clean up that complex. So you need strong, competent natural killer cells to do that, or immune checkpoint inhibitors that have become the biggest successful class of drugs. They still only work in a very small percentage of all cancers. And what we at least are trying to see, we've had some few cases that is that perhaps by adding our NK cells with the immune checkpoint inhibitors, that we can make tumors that previously didn't respond to this class of drugs respond. And so we think by adding our cells to existing therapies, we can make them better and also improve the chances that our cells can play a role across numerous tumors, not just targeted towards one.
Yeah, it's I mean, it it is interesting to me as somebody who is not a medical scientist, right? So this is not, biology is not my background. It's not sort of the things that I work on, but it's always interesting to me to hear sort of this evolution and walk that you go through to get to that, the overall mechanism of action that you're looking for, out of the thing that you're engineering. And amazing to know, as well that, the science, and how it will contribute to that end stage as well. So there are three questions that I like to ask every guest. What inspires you?
Oh, I think seeing patients suffering from advanced diseases, having seen it with my own father, and the physical and emotional toll that they go through, but also the emotional toll that their loved ones and caregivers go through, very much like what you
Mm.
most likely went through with your mom in her last years. That and to be able to try to do something that's going to have a profound difference. As an oncologist, I've seen far too many drugs approved that all they do is they improve progression-free survival by 2 or 3 weeks. Uh, if I'm a cancer patient and you've kept my tumor from growing for that period of time, yes. Am I grateful? Yes. But is it really making the profound change or impact that we really want? No. So I really wanted to focus on doing something that would make a profound difference in people's lives and their families' lives. And I think if we can take patients with advanced Alzheimer's disease who could no longer walk or talk or feed themselves, or even be engaged with their loved ones and be able to restore some of that ability, we believe that's a profound impact that will have. And so I think that's what really fuels me and drives me, is to try to make a difference in patients' lives in a non-toxic way.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. What concerns you?
Oh, so much. I think we live in a very tumultuous time. As the father of two young girls, I worry about what the future holds for them. Uh, and so many things, right, in terms of just the unrest and violence, and then environmental issues, and all of those things. And not to mention the impact of social media and devices. So, yeah, I think on a broader case, what that concerns me within the work that I'm doing, yeah, I think the biggest thing is just not that our treatment doesn't work, but that we just need to be able to execute correctly and properly to show the world what we can do. Um, and running a company, trying to meet the financial challenges and stuff, it's not the type of thing that I really enjoy. I really enjoy taking care of patients. I'm a caregiver at heart, and trying to come up with innovative solutions. But I think just trying to get this company across the finish line is the biggest challenge, and also what concerns me the most.
Yeah, I would imagine though too. I mean, in terms of that last part, I would imagine that your background and just your knowledge in terms of how things work has to just give you some tools and capabilities that a lot of leaders, wouldn't have, in terms of, one, understanding the patient journey, and two, understanding, components of the science that I believe that, there are in our field, right? Most people kind of come up, from the bench at some level, and sort of become CEO, because of reasons that in the science that led them there. And then I would think that your empathetic approach, as well as just your knowledge in terms of how the healthcare system works, has to give you just great benefits in terms of leading the company too.
Well, thanks for saying that. I think that I'm always a work in progress. We all are, right? So taking experiences in our past and trying both positive and mistakes, and learning from them, and can help guide us in whatever we're doing. I think that with regard to this, especially neuro, if we had listened to the status quo, if we had listened to quote the experts, um, all of the pundits, we would have stopped this years ago. We had one fund that offered us a lot of money because they liked our work in cancer, but they said, we think your neuro's crazy, so if we give you this money to move forward, you need to kill your neuro program.
Oh, wow.
Because we saw patients that actually were responding, we couldn't ignore that. And I think it was that agnostic approach and really seeing the human data that continued to push us to move forward. Um, do I feel like I have limitations and lack of experience on other aspects? Sure, I'm the first to admit when I don't know something. I also am the first to admit if I've made a mistake. I think it's important to just be honest, transparent, um, and not pretend like you know everything.
Mm.
So I do think it's a learning process, and life is, and I just try to rely on people that really have certain expertise in certain areas when I don't know what I'm doing, and really rely on getting good advice and being willing to accept criticism. So that's what I've tried to do. I'm far from perfect, and I think just try to do my best in all those ways.
Absolutely. Last question. What excites you?
Well, a lot of things. Watching my youngest play basketball. She's a force. I think seeing patients actually improving, and prime example of the one woman that we started treating in compassionate use, who we're still treating in Long Island. Over the last year, she has improved to the point where she's now able to, again, walk upstairs. She's able to interact with her grandkids. Still can't recall their names, but when they talk to her, she understands what they're saying. And that really excites me. Her husband, who's just the most dedicated caregiver, was worried that they were not going to make it to their 50-year wedding anniversary next year. I think it's going to happen, and I think he's very optimistic too, because she's really showing improvement over the last year. Um, that's what keeps me going. Despite all of the stress of running a company, it's the fact that we can actually see real benefits happening to patients. And I'm excited to see what we can do given the opportunity.
Well, Dr. Paul Song, thank you so much for coming on the Life Science Success Podcast, and thank you for sharing what you're working on currently at NKGen, and all the great things. I mean, I had no idea that so much of this conversation was going to revolve around things that are just so impactful, even to so many lives at this early stage. So, thanks a lot for all the work that you're doing.
Well, a pleasure to be here, and thank you for the great time together. And again, very sorry about your loss of your mom, and what she endured. And we're hoping that fewer and fewer families will have to endure that in the future.
Thank you for listening to Life Science Success. For complete details about this podcast, including show notes, how to get in touch with guests, and more episodes, please visit www.lifesciencesuccess.com. If there's someone you'd like for us to invite to the show as a guest, please let me know by sending me a message at the podcast website. Please click subscribe on your favorite podcast app, share the podcast, or tell a friend about it. And last but not least, rate the podcast. Thank you again.